Hi everyone, I'm Arlene Dickinson. Thanks for joining me on my podcast. I'm an entrepreneur, an author, a CEO, a grandmother, an investor, and an occasional TV star. Each week on this show, I'm going to talk to a new guest about reinvention. Listen, I've gone through the highs and the lows, and I've learned the hard way that one of the most important things in life is the ability to adapt to life. So join me as I talk to brilliant artists, gold medalists, journalists, and successful entrepreneurs about their own reinventions. We are really excited to be launching this podcast with a sponsor already on board. Thanks, TELUS, for believing in reinvention. We know that Canadian small businesses need support, and that's why TELUS launched a new campaign dedicated to supporting owners across the country. They're committed to stand with owners and to do everything they can to make things better for small business. They recently committed up to $500,000 to support, promote, and help owners in our communities from coast to coast during COVID-19. Thanks, TELUS. Today we're starting talking to Rex Huppke, a journalist for the Chicago Tribune. I found Rex on Twitter, and I've admired him from afar over Twitter. But in this episode, we talk about whether we're friends or just Twitter friends. I like to think that by the end of this episode, we're officially friends, I think. We recorded this in the very early days of COVID, but everything in this conversation is still very, very relevant. So here's my conversation with Rex Huppke. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Rex, thanks for joining me on this Reinvention podcast. I have admired you for so long on Twitter, and we have become, I guess, is it called Twitter friends? What is it called?
I think that's a fair assessment. Yes, I would. Yeah, absolutely. Twitter friends. Who knows? We could even just call it friends if we want to, I suppose.
Well, I invited you to come live in my basement when you were trying to, escape the U.S. Did I not?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I've been promised a shelter if need be. So I consider that an act of great generosity. So
I think I even offered to give you pancakes and maple syrup and stuff outside your bedroom door every morning.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, gosh, it sounds fantastic. I mean, that alone, we don't even need the reason for me to flee. I could just come for the pancakes alone. So.
Exactly. So for those of you who are joining us, Rex is a journalist and a humor columnist for the Chicago Tribune. Lives in Chicago. But, the reason I wanted to speak with you, Rex, is you've actually gone through a fairly interesting reinvention of your own over the course of your career. And I was doing some homework on you. And you started your career as a chemical engineer.
Yes, I did. Oops.
Yeah, how did that, from that to a humor columnist? Tell me what happened.
Okay, well, it was a somewhat circuitous path to get to where I am now. But so my dad was a chemical engineer, and his dad was a chemical engineer. My dad was kind of this, he was almost like the absent-minded professor from that old Disney movie. He was sort of a inventor, and he just did really cool stuff. And so I always saw the things he did and thought, oh, this is cool. This is what I want to do. And I think it was maybe I was lightly brainwashed by them into thinking I had to be a chemical engineer. Although to my dad's credit, he always did say, I want you to do what you want to do. But anyway, I went to college and at Lehigh in Pennsylvania and studied chemical engineering. And it was actually midway through my junior year. I was sitting in a library studying. I have this very vivid recollection of this. It was one of those moments in life that you kind of always remember. I was in the library studying for a thermodynamics test. And I was sitting there staring at the textbook. And then I looked up just, kind of straight ahead in front of me and thought, I hate this. I just absolutely, there is nothing about any of this that I enjoy. I thought, I can do it. I mean, I was getting decent grades. I wasn't the best student overall, but I was doing fine. But I just thought, I don't care about this stuff. I don't like it. It's not fun, but I didn't know what else to do. So I said, okay, well, let me go ahead and finish and get my degree, because it wasn't like there was another career option sitting right in front of me that made sense. So I got my degree, and then I got a job at a company that was like a consulting firm that designed petroleum refineries, of all things. And about 6 months into that, I said, okay, yeah, I definitely don't want to do this. I was like, now I've tried it and this really sucks, and I hate it. But again, I had student loan debt. I was making decent money, and I didn't really have another option sitting right in front of me. So I just kind of kept plodding along, and I was quite miserable. And then a weekly newspaper started in the little town in Pennsylvania where I lived. And it's a long story, but just again, kind of random circumstances, I wound up writing at night for that little weekly paper. And so I would be 8 hours during the day as a chemical engineer, and I would be abjectly miserable. And then I'd go to the paper at night for 4 hours and be marvelously happy. So it didn't take long before I realized, okay, this is what I need to do. Now, how do I go about doing that? And this is where I've always credited my parents for being wise. They said, look, we want you to do what you want to do, but do it the right way. Be smart about it. Don't just jump. Because if I just jumped, I would have been making approximately, $12,000 a year at a tiny paper with, no healthcare and massive debt. So I just started making calls. I started talking to people in the business and that sort of thing, and finally found someone who was a friend of a friend who was an editor at a smaller paper in Baltimore. And he said, well, have you thought about graduate school? I said, well, no, of course not. I have a chemical engineering degree. What journalism graduate school would want me? And he said, oh, no, you'd be surprised. They like people with different backgrounds. So I went that route. I wound up going to the University of Missouri Graduate School for Journalism, which is like a 2-year program. And what that basically did was it allowed me to transition from career A to career B without just falling off a cliff. I had started doing some writing, but I still didn't really know what I was doing. So it gave me the nuts and bolts education as to be a journalist, and allowed me to kind of enter the field at a slightly better level than I otherwise would have. So, yeah.
At that time, how old would you have been around then?
Yeah, that's a great question. How old was I? I was probably about, 24, 25. Because I was about 20. I was 21 when I graduated college. I worked for about 3 years. Yeah. So when I went to grad school, I would have been around 24, 25 years old. So I did that for 2 years, then came out and again, sort of a little bumping around, but wound up with the Associated Press in Indiana. And that was sort of my first real journalism job. And did that for about 5 years. And then we moved up to Chicago, and I caught on with the Chicago Tribune, and I've been here ever since.
So when you think about that, like you're 20, I just think about being 24 years old and having gone through university and had their college and had the debt that you had and all those things. But you're lucky that you had parents who were understanding and actually helped you transition, because what's the advice that you would give to, other people that age who were maybe exactly like you were, got up, one day and said, I hate this. I don't know why I decided to take, law or whatever it is that I took. And now I want to do something else. Because I hear from those people all the time, and they're always saying, like, I went to school and took this because my parents wanted me to, or I felt I should, and now I feel completely stuck. So what was it that got you unstuck and had the courage and gave you the courage to take up writing?
It was, I'll admit, there were a couple of kind of almost fluky circumstances. For example, the weekly newspaper that started where I lived, that was bizarrely random. I mean, right about the point I had reached the end of my rope, that appeared. And then I had a roommate at the time who, we had this routine where we were two, guys in their 20s living together. We were just generally complete idiots. And so we'd get home from work, sit down on the couch, and immediately start watching a videotape that we had of all the Simpsons episodes, and, just mindlessly sit around and goof around and whatever. So I came home one day, and the paper had just started, and it had been randomly sent to homes all over the area where we lived, and our address happened to be one of them. So I had the paper, and I was flipping through it, and I said, this thing's actually kind of good looking. And of course he ignored me. And then they had a full page ad saying they were looking for writers, photographers, blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, it looks like they're looking for people to write. And I kept flipping, but when you can tell somebody's staring at you. So
Yeah.
I looked over and he's staring at me, and I was like, what? And he's like, oh, well, he's like, why don't you call him? He's like, you like to write. Why don't you give him a call and see what happens? And I'm like, nah. What am I going to show him? That's no. And so I went back to looking at the paper, but then I could feel that he was still staring at me. I looked over and I was like, what is your problem? Stop looking at me. And he's like, and this was like probably the only time in our friendship that there was any level of seriousness. And he looks at me and he's like, go call them right now or you're never going to do it. And I was like, fine, jerk, I'll go call.
Yeah, fine, I'll show you. I'll call.
Yeah, exactly. So I did. And then they told me to come in, and that sort of started it all. So, so there was that element of just, circumstantial things falling into place, which helps. But at the end of the day, what it was just, I had, and I think some of this came from my parents too, I had sort of an unwillingness to settle. Like I just was like, I don't like this, and I don't want to be stuck in this forever. And I think that, along with having, parents who were encouraging, but not like, overly encourage, they were encouraging with parameters. Like I said, we want you to do this, but we don't want you to, go broke, and because we can't bail you out. So, I had some good guidance, and that was fortunate. But I think for anybody, and I teach a journalism class at Loyola University here in Chicago. And I tell my students this too. I said, you have to find what you want to do, and you can't expect it to be easy. Every job you take, every step you take is a step toward eventually finding what you want to do. The odds of you popping out of college and finding that thing are slim to none. And frankly, if you do, I would question whether that actually is the right thing, because in a couple of years your mind might change. So, I think that people just have to have a resolve to find where they belong, find what really gives them joy, but have the patience to take the time to get there, and to not, like I said before, jump off any cliffs in the process, because that'll set you back. I mean, you may be in a job and it's not right, but it's paying the bills, and you're not exactly sure what the next step is. So use it as a means to an end, survive and keep looking.
Yeah, it's really good advice, because I know, I feel like there's a different kind of pressure on young adults today than there was even, when I was younger, or you were younger. I feel like a lot of them, by the time they're 21 or 24 years old, they feel like they're failures if they haven't kind of solved world peace and started a charity that's $1 million, and created a career that's, an abundance of being a kind of Renaissance person who does everything, everything well. And, it's a social media kind of dilemma that's created this sense of needing to be bigger than you can be. And then having these high expectations of yourself. And I like the idea of saying to people, it's okay, take a step, do things for a while, and you're going to learn about yourself, and you're going to be able to pivot. But it's not getting stuck in doing something that you're not enjoying. That I think is the biggest mistake people make, where they feel like you say, they settle, because it's just, it feels like there's expectations on them to continue doing what they're doing, even if they hate it.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree that it's I think the key thing is recognizing the value of each step in the process. People have often asked me, well, don't you regret being a chemical engineer? I mean, you did your whole undergrad in that, and then you worked a few years. And I said, no, I don't regret it at all. I took a lot of really good things from that education. It taught me how to think logically. I mean, I think it impacts how I have always been as a reporter and a writer, in terms of the way I think about things. And so, there was value in that. And frankly, I think having that different background, it really helped me get into grad school also. I think that was a much more of an advantage than I would have expected. So, you may not realize it at the time. And of course, the hardest thing is to get anybody who's younger to have patience and to look more than, a day or two ahead in time. But I really do think that people need to recognize that idea that, okay, maybe I'm not in a perfect position here, but I'm getting some skills, I'm making some contacts, I'm making some money, which everybody needs, unfortunately. And then there will be another step beyond this.
Yeah. So for 6 years, you wrote a column called I Just Work Here. It was an advice column for the workplace. And your final article on that column, talk about saying that you used to tell people a lot, be a decent human being. But then you realized that what you should have been saying was be a human being. What did you mean by that?
Well, so one of the things that when I started that workplace column, and it was funny because I was not a business writer. It was they asked me to do it, I think, because I could sometimes write with a little sense of humor, and so they wanted me to bring something a little more lively to the idea of, you know, a workplace piece, something that was a little funny and a little off kilter and that sort of thing. So it was interesting because I was diving into just the whole arena that I didn't know anything about, and I'd frankly never even really thought a whole lot specifically about workplace issues. And what I started to find real quick was that most of the problems that I kept hearing about from readers and just reading about in general when it came to workplace dynamics, it was like peeling an onion. When as you took you peeled the layers away, and eventually it all came down to somebody was not nice to somebody else, or, you know, somebody made an assumption about somebody else that was not really very thoughtful, or, you know, there wasn't enough time spent actually considering it. And so I came up fairly quickly. I think it was within the first maybe 3-4 months of doing that column. I said, hey, just be a decent human being, right? Just be a nice person, and good things come from that. So it was a way of sort of distilling, workplace advice down to like an insanely simple phrase, or just a quick. What I was hoping was that people would kind of get that in their head, and it would be like before you send that email, before you make that comment during a meeting, think about, okay, wait, am I being a decent human being here? Am I being a good person? And so I hammered that throughout the time that I did that column, and people seemed to respond pretty well to it. I had like magnets made up that I sent out to read. I tried to sort of make it into a little bit of a slogan. But then when I got to the end of that column, and I was moving on to write more regular columns like I do now, I thought about that, and I did think, what does the word decent mean? Why do I need the word decent here? I mean, that should be part of being a human being, right? I mean, we should inherently be good to each other and treat each other fairly and treat each other well. So that was kind of the way I wrapped that piece up, was taking the slogan that I had sort of dragged through the 6 years of writing the column, and meditated a little bit on that, and tried to bring people around to the idea of, we are all human beings, and we should treat each other well. We should be decent by nature. And so, let's just take that word out and say be a human being instead of be a decent human being.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, we don't, especially today, I guess, as we're sitting in what seems to be just a crisis of humanity, in so many ways. I mean, there's just so much going on. And I often think, and I would love to just chat with you a little bit about this, because just thinking about who you are and kind of sounds like your upbringing and what has driven you to do the things you're doing, and your wonderful sense of humor, which I truly enjoy. I mean, I love following you on social. You've written some things that have made me cry because of your compassion, and you've written some things that have made me cry from tears of laughter because you're just so clever with your use of language, and your ability to understand and dissect the human condition. But you're sitting in the U.S. right now, and I do want to talk to you about that, because I often think about the impact on the psyche of journalists, in particular in America right now. and how what's going on in your world of journalism, of trying to, speak the truth, of trying to stand against injustice and against the indecency of people. How you cope with that? Like, how are you doing? Like, how is it impacting you?
That's a great question. And I have occasional primal scream therapy sessions, and just a lot of banging my head against the wall and that sort of thing. Seems to eating lots of ice cream sometimes dulls the pain. No, I would be lying if I said that it was particularly easy or pleasant. There has since the rise of Donald Trump, there has been a very noticeable increase in the just nastiness of readers who disagree with me, and not just me. I mean, this is true of any journalist, and it has, the vitriol has just grown a lot. I mean, and it's become more violent, and it's become more difficult to engage, which is what I really dislike. Journalists, I'm sure, since the first person, drew pictures on a cave wall, they have been getting negative feedback, and that's fine. I mean, that comes with what we do. And of course, I've been doing this long enough that I've gotten, I could write before all of this, I could write a perfectly nice story about puppies, and I would get angry letters from cat people. I mean, and that's okay. But the difference is this: it used to be that I could write a piece from a liberal, I'm generally a pretty liberal person, I could write a piece from sort of a liberal standpoint on a issue, and I would hear from some conservative readers who strongly disagreed, and they might even be nasty about it, but I could respond to them, and often I would write sort of satirical things. So in the response, I would step out of that voice and say, okay, look, here's where I'm coming from. And I recognize we're not going to agree on this, but I just wanted to sort of better explain myself and say, I hear you, and I respectfully disagree, whatever. And back when things were normal, I would say at least 9 times out of 10, when I did that, I would get a response. Often the person would apologize for the tone they took in the original email, and we'd have a perfectly nice exchange. And in some cases, there was a time when I even had this sort of cluster of sort of, I referred to them as like my grumpy grandfathers, like sort of these these conservative readers who disagreed with everything I read and would always say so, but were very nice, and we'd have these kind of funny exchanges. Well, when Trump came along, it took a little bit, but that all started to get dicier. And there was people became much more dug in, and they seemed to be, I felt as though they had permission to be a lot more unkind, a lot less kind, and a lot just more kind of fiery and in some cases threatening. And it reached a point where I respond to very little now. I try to respond to people that are saying nice things, but the hate mail now, I don't have much bandwidth to try to engage, because it just doesn't work. I would send people links to actual factual documents, and they'd say fake news, and so or worse. I mean, I had situations escalate to the point where I was trying to engage with somebody, and I was now there were threats involved, and I had to deal with security issues and stuff. So it's been bad, and frankly, I'm this guy at the Chicago Tribune. I can't imagine how people with really big platforms, like Rachel Maddow's and stuff of the world, or columnists at the Post or the New York Times, what they're dealing with. So it's frustrating, number one, because I feel like I'm a better columnist when I can engage with people that disagree with me, because I don't think I'm right all the time. I've made plenty of mistakes, plenty of times where I've gone too far, and it helps to have people there to kind of correct me, or at least for me to see, like, oh, you know what, I was making a joke. That joke hit this person the wrong way, and I feel bad about that. Like that's that's not what you want, especially as a humor writer. So, so that element of it has been hard. As far as the just sort of routine name calling and abuse, I mean, I don't like it, but you kind of, you learn to deal with it to some degree. You sort of learn to, it's kind of a self-care thing. You sort of find time to step away from that and stuff, because it can be like a death by a thousand cuts, but it's just, it's like it almost becomes like a really, really awful sounding white noise after a while.
Yeah, well, I feel like they're going to need PTSD support for a lot of the journalists that are out there right now, because there is and I think you've done a really good job. Like now what you do is you indirectly share some of the comments you get, but you do it in a very humorous way to, kind of poke fun at the type of feedback you're getting and kind of how ludicrous some of it is, and how difficult it would be to reply to, because the things you're talking about relative to the political environment or relative to anything going on is actually, some of it just does, there is no way to reply. You're exactly right. And I've always said, my dad always used to tell me to ignore the haters, because at some point the hate is so intense that you can't engage in a conversation. And that's unfortunate, because as you said before, you were able to have a discourse with somebody and talk about things, and you don't have to agree, but you could always see each other's points of view. But that seems to have gone away. Yeah.
It's a shame. And I, one thing that I always, whenever I talk about this sort of thing, I like to stress this, because I do think it's important. There is a misconception among liberals like myself that this is there's one side doing this, that this is sort of a right wing kind of thing. And of course, for Trump supporters, yes, that's true. I mean, obviously people who support Trump and dislike columns that I write regarding him are coming from that side. Yes. But there's some, the far left can be horrendous when it comes to this sort of thing as well. And I've experienced it directly, like on occasion when I've I wrote a joking piece about Bernie Sanders one time, and was probably the worst, most vile responses I've ever received in my life. I mean, it was just stunning. It was worse than anything I'd ever gotten, which was saying something. And I don't mean to just pin that. I don't want to get into a, thing about Bernie supporters or anything, but the point being here, I have conservative colleagues, and we have compared notes before on hate mail, and to suggest that it is only conservatives or Republicans or right-wing people or whatever who send vile, awful, threatening notes is preposterous. I mean, it really does come from both sides, and I don't think it ends until there are consequences, and I don't know what those consequences are. I don't out people who send me stuff. I mean, you've seen I sometimes share these emails. I always trim the person's name off. I just don't, I don't want to deal with that. I don't like the idea. I don't want to be doxxed myself. I don't want to dox anybody, so I don't know what the solution is, but people, I think on both sides, will continue this kind of behavior until this kind of behavior becomes unacceptable, and until people start losing jobs over it and that sort of thing. So, again, I'm not going to police it. It's not a position I'm comfortable with or want to put myself in. But I do think as a society, we need to reach a point where we come to some kind of a reckoning with this, because it is very unhealthy. I mean, it's very unhealthy for the people on the receiving end, but frankly, I think it's pretty unhealthy for the people on the sending end too. I mean, some of the things that I receive, I'm like, how horrible is your existence that you would write something like this to another person? I mean, it's a real, it's strange, and I don't fully understand it, but I do think that not now, we've got enough on our hands, obviously, but at some point I feel like certainly U.S. society, and I don't think this is unique just to us by any means. I think we all have to kind of start thinking about this idea of decency in terms of online behavior.
Well, I think I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the guest on the show was talking about the consequences of this this type of behavior hasn't really come to fruition yet. So there is no real consequence to it. And like, and the analogy he had used was, World War II was a consequence of a lot of hatred that was out there, and a lot of, this creation of different points of view that were so extreme that there was no middle ground. And so then became, turns into a war. And then and then the consequence of the war made people realize that they needed to actually come back together again. And, his point was, let's hope this doesn't turn into the need for a war, because that shouldn't be the consequence we have to go through in order for us to realize the impact of this type of hatred that we're displaying through social media and through our communication to each other. So you've actually done a really interesting thing though, Rex. I love that you actually have taken some of this and you created the Insult a Columnist holiday food drive. I thought it was like, you're going to insult me, I'm going to do some good with it, man. Like how did you come up with that?
Honestly, it was kind of a random thought, to be honest with you. I'm always trying to figure out with the hate mail that I get and all that, the just online nonsense. I'm always trying to figure out, like, okay, what's a way to flip the switch here a little bit, how can I do something with this, possibly positive or just at least shine a light on it or whatever. And so I honestly, I wish I could remember, to be honest. I don't remember exactly what the thought process was, but for some reason it hit me and I thought, okay, these people love to hate on me. So there's this organization here in Chicago called the Greater Chicago Food Depository, which is basically a massive operation that supplies food to food pantries throughout the whole area here, kind of like regionally. And they buy, they're able to buy in such quantities that they leverage their money very well. And it's a real well-run organization. And so I thought, well, okay, what if I said, okay, you guys think I'm awful. The people that send me nice emails think I'm not awful. Let's let capitalism decide this, in a sense. And so I created this competition, and I said, you can with the help of the food depository, they set up a web page. I said, you can donate to them however much you want, and you donate under two different teams, Rex Rocks and Rex Stinks, and we'll let the hand of the market decide whether I'm good or bad. And so it was fun. And I will say that did bring out a little bit more goodness from people who generally can't stand me. They sent notes saying, well, I hate everything you write, but I just donated, and blah blah blah. So it was nice, but there was a little hesitation at first about whether it was a good idea, because what if it tanks and then I look dumb, and I said, I don't care. I've looked dumb plenty of times in my life. I can do it again. So we did it, and I was expecting, maybe we raise a few $10,000 or something like that. It'll be nice. And all of a sudden it just took off. We wound up raising over $100,000 for the food bank. And we all of a sudden were beating out all of these like big corporations that do their annual food drive thing through them. And it was hilarious. And so it was kind of just my goal in that, aside from obviously trying to help out the food depository, was to say, okay, maybe do something like this where we kind of all recognize that this is all kind of silly, right? That this is, maybe a way of kind of bringing the temperature down a little bit in the whole broader conversation, I guess. And so yeah, it was fun. And like I said, I was blown away. And that's one of the things that I love so much to see is we talk about human beings and people being good people and decent. And, it's easy to become jaded if you spend a lot of time online and you see all the trolls, and, it's easy to think that a lot of people are jerks and most people are jerks or whatever. But the truth is that most people are quite good. And you don't always see that because I think sometimes they need a path to follow. So, people are busy, they're dealing with work and kids and this, that, and the other thing. And they may want to do something good, but they don't have the time to figure that out, what that is. So when you open a door, they they rush in. And that was the case with this. And I've seen it many times just as a reporter. You write a story about a family whose house burned down right before the holidays, and next thing you know, people from all over have sent, the family new furniture and new Christmas gifts for the kids. And, so people they do amazing things. And so this was one of those examples. I didn't know what this was going to turn into. I wasn't expecting a great deal, but it wound up doing a huge amount of good. And I was so happy, and I was so just proud of all these people who were coming together and donating over what I thought was kind of a silly idea, but it made a real big difference for a lot of people in this area. So it was great.
Yeah, no, it's very cool. I mean, when you think about, just back to the point on journalism, I'm sure you had columnists that influenced your career in the past, and you think about reinvention and what media has to do to reinvent itself. Like, I know that you often talk about, to people, like, support through digital subscriptions, or try and help support the newspapers and in general. But what's your view on how media has to reinvent itself? I mean, coming out of this, there's a lot of, as you said, the whole fake news, the whole kind of targeted campaigns against media in general. What's the solution to that? How do you come out of that?
I wish I knew the answer to that question, to be honest with you.
This could be big. This could be really big.
Yeah, I'd be in a much more secure industry if that was the case. I don't know. It's very, very difficult right now. What I would like to think is that there will be something of a pendulum swing, because while we have a president who is constantly denouncing the media, and who has effectively convinced a pretty sizable portion of the population that the media is not telling them the truth. I think that, especially right now with the coronavirus, they are starting to see who's actually telling the truth. And that is when the metal meets the rail, and people are getting sick and dying, and you have a president downplaying things, and the media is reporting what's actually happening, it's my hope that you will at least chip away at that percentage that he led to doubt what journalists do. I mean, it's always kind of funny to me, because they make it sound as though journalists have some grand malicious intent in life, and like as if we got into this low-paying, unstable industry solely because we wanted to, rain terror down on Donald Trump or something like that. I mean, journalists by nature are highly skeptical, and we do believe deeply in telling the truth. And so the whole idea, the fake news pitch line that he's used for so long is really grating. I mean, again, it is difficult to get people who don't trust actual facts, it's difficult to reason with them. And so in turn, it's difficult to, how do you win those people back, so to speak, if they've actually stopped believing in what's real and what's not real. So unfortunately, I think that something like what's happening now is the sort of thing where people are going to start to see who's conning them and who's trying to get the truth across, and who's trying to, accurately report on what's happening in the country. So I would like to think that, as we kind of come out of all this, if we come out of it, meaning the sort of Trump era, that there's going to be a sort of a return to some sort of reliance on and appreciation of mainstream media, of, reliable sources of news. Now, the big question then is okay, how do we get people? Unfortunately, people need to pay for that, right? And that's really the whole system is messed up now, because for too long, news organizations were giving stuff away on the internet for free and not seeing that the print editions were going to become less popular. Advertising revenue was going to go down, and so we kind of gave things away, and now all of a sudden we're asking people to pay for it, and a whole generation of people who got it free are saying, what are you talking about? We're not going to do that. So it's a matter of navigating that, and it's hard. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, the hope is that people recognize when you are dealing with a president who lies constantly, you need the media more than ever to cut through it all. When you're dealing with a massive health crisis like this, you need the media to be there to help you actually sort out fact from fiction. And I hope that resonates with people. And I hope people start to recognize that and realize that, that the journalists, and I don't mean myself, I mean, like the people on the ground doing the reporting, actually risking their lives in some cases, are absolutely necessary for us to function as a democracy, and they have to be supported. And whether that comes via people subscribing and to their local papers and that sort of thing, or it comes from public-private partnerships, nonprofit, entities investing in newspapers. I don't know the answer to that, but I do think that I feel like this country is headed towards a moment of clarity, at least, where the doubting of where the truth is coming from will become a little bit less cloudy.
Yeah, I think I believe that that's true as well. I mean, people are seeking truth, and they're seeking people that are pushing for the truth. So, and I think I just want to kind of circle back, because we are in the middle of really just something I don't know. Are you isolating at home right now? What are you doing? What's going on in your life as you try to do your job and in the middle of COVID? And how are you feeling through all this? How's your family?
Good, thank you. And everybody is healthy, and we fortunately we get along, so that works out well. It's weird, but good. Truthfully, for me, from a professional standpoint, I generally work from home. I would try to get in maybe once a week or something, just to sort of touch base with people. But I write from home mainly because I kind of tend to write at weird hours and stuff. But so it hasn't been that dramatically different for me. The primary difference is in terms of getting out to do any reporting or anything like that. That is all just being done over the phone. But yeah, I mean, the main thing is that my home office has suddenly been invaded by the rest of my family. So yeah. But there, believe me, I feel, every day, frankly, just ridiculously fortunate because, I'm able to work from home. My wife's able to work from home. Everybody's healthy. We're okay. I mean, there are so many people out there who aren't in that position and are struggling mightily, and I feel for them, and just really count my blessings and try to figure out, okay, what's the right thing to do here? What's the right thing to write about? How can I do things that hopefully will have some kind of a impact, either on driving home the truth of what's going on, or just maybe even just making people laugh here and there to get their mind off things.
Well, you definitely are having an impact. And as I said, I genuinely appreciate all the things you write. And I feel, as your neighbors to the north from Canada to the US, there's a lot of empathy and understanding, and specifically thinking about, the healthcare systems and how it's impacting Americans and their ability to get tests and their ability to make sure that they're safe and protected, and that there is some leadership being shown right now. And I actually, Rex had a test. I had to get tested myself this week.
Did you?
Yeah. COVID. Yeah, I had some symptoms, and so I got in, and luckily for us, I was able to get in and get tested and get the results fairly quickly. And it did strike me, because I have a lot of American friends, and I did think hard about how much I hope you guys can get access to the right testing and the right opportunities to make sure that you can put this under control. Not that it's not under control anywhere in the world, but we hope that we all will be able to put it under control sooner rather than later and get back to some sense of normal. It's very difficult, eh?
Oh, it is. It's amazing the speed with which it all changed. I mean, we've been. It's like a switch went off, and the whole world kind of got upended. It's really remarkable. How first of all, everything went okay with the test? You're clear? Okay.
I'm clear. But it's a
That's
very
good.
interesting thing, when you go through it and think, gee, I'm in my early 60s, and so there's a very good likelihood, I would have been in that higher risk category for sure.
Uh-huh.
But at the end of the day, you can become so paranoid about this thing that you don't know what to do. So and I'm actually self-isolated. I'm by myself. So I talk to myself and I agree with myself and I don't have any fights going on.
Excellent.
My own workspace.
In the event you do start fighting with yourself, shoot me a note and I'll try to talk you down.
I've done that. I've actually, no, yes. But yeah, I'm healthy and you've got a couple kids, right? You've got
Yes. Yeah, I have 2 kids. Yeah. But they're doing all right. They've handled it well, and they miss their friends, and it's obviously frustrating at times, but it's been going okay. I mean, the strange thing is not knowing what to expect moving forward. They're wondering, are we going to go back to school in the fall? And I don't know. I mean, maybe you will. Maybe it'll be staggered classes, so they don't have as many kids in the building at once. I mean, we just don't have any idea. And I think that's, one of the problems with this whole thing, I think, is our modern day demand for immediate answers, immediate gratification. We want to know, and this is one of those things where I think you just have to wait. I mean, it could be next year before there are solid treatments. It'll certainly be next year before there's a vaccine, or who knows? I mean, a month from now, they could all of a sudden stumble upon a treatment that's extremely effective and it changes everything. So it just doesn't fit our modern day mindset of immediacy to have to sit here and just be patient until people that are real smart hopefully figure things out. So
well, and it's just maybe that is a good place for us to probably sign off. I think at the end of the day, I am very grateful for a few things through this, and one of them certainly is, above all else, is our healthcare workers, and that is, I think, globally a perspective that everybody has an enormous amount of respect for the people who are on the front lines fighting this. But do want to end with saying also that as for journalists who have integrity and who are fighting that good fight and making sure the information's being disseminated, and keeping us smiling as you do, Rex, but also keeping us thinking. So thank you for everything you do. I'm so glad we met on Twitter, and I'm so glad we've had a chance to talk this way and that we can be friends.
Same. Yeah, absolutely. You're wonderful. And we've, as you said, we've been Twitter friends for a long time, and I've always valued your view on things and your thoughts so much. So it's great to talk, not face to face, but, talk.
Talking is a good thing, and it's maybe been a bit of a lost art. I think we're all getting
yeah, right, exactly.
Instead of talking. So thanks for taking the time, Rex, and I wish nothing but good health to you and your family, and thanks for keeping us informed and entertained, and for all you do, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Oh, same here, Arlene, and my best to you all as well.
Okay, see, I like to think we're officially friends now. Rex, you are still welcome at my place if you want to come up to Canada at any time. I love how he raised all that money for the Chicago Food Bank. And if you think about it, he zeroed in on this incredible source of energy. He took all those negative comments, the hate emails, and he found a way to channel that negative energy into something positive, something that makes a difference. He basically did the exact same thing when he finally switched his career, right? I mean, he was miserable being a chemical engineer. And instead of drowning in that, he used it as motivation to reinvent his career. That's what I really want to do with this podcast, and that's why I want to talk to people about reinvention. I want folks to recognize that the same energy that's keeping you up at night, when you're worrying about your career or your marriage or whatever it is, that you need to listen to that energy and see if you can pivot Let that energy give you the push you need to make a difference in your life, to make change. Thank you so much to Rex for chatting with me. You can read him in the Chicago Tribune, and he's syndicated all over. And he's amazing on Twitter, @Rex Huppke. Follow him. He is great. Thanks again to TELUS for the support and sponsorship, and thanks so much to you for listening. I'm going to be talking with some really incredible people over the next little bit, so I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Thanks. Stay safe and stay human. This podcast is made possible by the great folks at Venture Communications. Thanks to our engineers, writers, producers, and all the folks who work really hard to bring you these great stories of reinventions each and every week.